serious departmental error. Has anyone lost their job as a result of this?
My first priority was not trying to conduct some sort of witch hunt.
100,000 people up to have potentially been put at risk, and no one's lost their job.
Let me finish if you don't mind.
Would you rule out the use of superinjunctions in your department in the future?
Well, you can never say never.
Well, why?
But
You just said you wouldn't have done it and it was a mistake.
Look, it's something that I never want to see again in my time in Parliament or in government.
But you can't give us the assurance.
And
Defence Secretary, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I know you've had a very, very busy day, so we are really grateful for you to spare the time. There are two parts to this story, it seems to me. There's a substance to the leak and the details with regards to what's happened to Afghans, and there's also the use of the constitutionally unprecedented superinjunction. Let's deal with the situation in Afghanistan and the data breach first. You said today that the person who sent the data set in error was a defence official. Can you clarify, were they a civil servant, a special advisor, or can you confirm the reporting of Larissa Brown in the Times today that it was a soldier?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad to be able to talk to you about this. It's long overdue. I'd like to have done it sooner.
So would we.
But I've been subject to the same court order and injunction as you have.
Indeed.
And it offends me as a parliamentarian just as it offends you as a journalist not to be able to inform the public or have Parliament hold government to account. Mm-hmm. And I've been a parliamentarian now I've been an MP for 28 years. And in government and in opposition. And so it's been deeply uncomfortable. Look, the data breach, which of course was only discovered or brought to Minister's attention in August 2023.
The previous government, to be clear. Yeah.
Happened in February 2022. And I think it's for the ministers there at the time in the previous government to explain the action they took and the circumstances. And it's not really for me, I think, to start to identify, expose the individual that the investigations at the time underlined had mistakenly sent this spreadsheet in error.
Can you tell us whether they're still in the employ of the British government?
They are no longer doing the same job on the Afghan brief.
But they're still employed by the British government.
And this is, in the end, this is bigger than the actions of a single individual. And for me as Defence Secretary, now, in this government, my biggest concern and my first focus coming into government was to try and get a grip of something that was entirely unprecedented.
I understand, and I do want to turn to those bigger issues, believe me. But I do think listeners will be interested. This has obviously been, by your own admission, this was a serious departmental error. It has had profound and grave consequences right up to and including risk to life. That was the entire basis that your department sought and secured the superinjunction. And you're telling me that that person is still being employed? They weren't fired?
So, first of all, the superinjunction covered any of these questions.
Yes.
Right?
So now we can finally talk about them.
And accountability, transparency starts today. And it starts today because of the actions I've been taking during this course of this last year as Defence Secretary in the new government.
Has anyone been fired?
To get to grips with the situation.
Has anyone lost their job as a result of this?
Look, I'm actually not going to get into the personnel matters.
Well, I do think people listening, Defence Secretary, I mean, your colleague, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, the other day called for people to lose their jobs at the BBC because of a broadcast by Bob Villan. I would think, however serious that might be, I think a lot of people listening to this would consider that a situation where a huge amount of public money has been spent as a result of this, thousands of people have had their lives uprooted, there has been a constitutionally defying superinjunction that has never been applied in a situation like that before, and we don't know what consequences that might have, and more germane, 100,000 people up to have potentially been put at risk. That's your own department's assessment. And no one's lost their job.
So you have just made the case for the deep complexity of this situation.
No, I think that's a very straightforward situation.
Well, let me finish if you don't mind. And that requires the scrutiny that has not been able to be brought to this. It requires accountability that's not been brought to this. And I have to say, look, under that previous government, when you had ministers in the last government alerted to this data breach, they could have chosen accountability, but they chose an injunction.
And I'm asking you.
And you've had that subject.
Indeed, I have.
And I have for this period.
And
today, we're able to start that process of looking into those complexities,
yes,
and then starting to judge whether and in what ways people should be held to account.
It's not that complex, Secretary of State. A catastrophic error was committed with catastrophic consequences. So I'm just going to ask one more time. We've had 2 years to get an answer to this question. Has anybody lost their job? Do you think, let me put it another way, should someone lose their job over this?
So my first priority was not trying to conduct some sort of witch hunt on the defence official that released the spreadsheet that caused this
it's not a witch hunt. It's accountability.
Profound data loss.
Your department has covered its own tracks for 2 years, Secretary of State. It has done so on the basis of a review which we can talk about, which has now miraculously concluded that the threat wasn't as bad as it was. So I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for accountability. I mean, for God's sake, 2 guys got 4 years today for chopping down a sycamore tree, and yet you're proposing that as a result of this massive, massive data loss, which has resulted in all the things I described, that there'll be no accountability. Do you understand why it is that so many people might lose their trust in politics when they hear things like that?
So my argument to you is that accountability can start today. Accountability in due course as the facts of this are properly scrutinised and examined, that will come. My task, and I entirely reject your characterisation of the last year while I've been Defence Secretary, that somehow the purpose of the department has been to cover up. My purpose, having been served with the same injunction before the election when I was Shadow Defence Secretary, I was determined when we came into government that we were going to have a fresh look at this. That required us, because we have a system of this government in this country where if you're in opposition, you come into government, you don't get any access to the policy advice, the threat assessments, the legal advice, all the information that previous ministers under the last government would have had to make their decisions. So we set about building that.
I understand.
We set about covering that ground. I took that to Cabinet colleagues in the early autumn.
Yes.
They wanted fresh insights. We then took action to try and contain the spread of the database that had not been taken before. Before Christmas, I streamlined the range of different relocation schemes that the previous government had in place. And early this year, commissioned Paul Rimmer so that we've got a fresh, up-to-date assessment of the risk. And it's on the basis of Rimmer. It's on the basis of Rimmer that the injunction that you and I have been subject to has been lifted by the judge.
I want to talk about,
and it's on the basis of Rimmer that I've been able to change government policy and announce that to the House of Commons today.
I want to talk about the Rimmer review. One quick question, though, on accountability. And we'll assume, on the basis of your answers, that no one has been fired, at least yet. But would you consider, on the basis of wanting accountability, a public inquiry?
Well, I've actually argued for some time that actually Parliament is more capable of conducting some of the...
Parliament's only just found out about it.
Precisely. So Parliament is, in general terms, Parliament is much more capable of conducting some of the inquiries better than the long, drawn-out, legalistic, highly expensive public inquiry system. And in my view, this is, and I said this in the House of Commons today, having kicked off for the first time, restored, if you like, parliamentary accountability with the announcement I've made today, that's disclosing this big data breach, that is ending the secret resettlement route, and ensuring that we've lifted the injunction today, parliamentary accountability can start. And this seems to me absolutely the sort of thing that the common select committees could launch an in-depth inquiry, and that's part of now creating the accountability that hasn't been there before.
So do you rule out a public inquiry, Defence Secretary? You rule it out?
I want to see Parliament demonstrating it's capable of doing the job, because in general terms...
I understand that point, but do you just think, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want a public inquiry, there won't be one.
I
Yes
would
or
say
no?
first and foremost, let's see what Parliament can do.
So potentially there could be one in the
Too
future.
often in public debate like this, on a variety of issues, people reach for this idea: public inquiry
But this is an
is the answer to
extraordinary
everything.
circumstance.
They
We
last
do
for
need to
years.
learn from it, don't we?
They cost thousands.
Yeah.
They become very legalistic. Lawyers do
This
well
has been a
out of it.
legalistic process.
Very often,
Lawyers have done very well out of
very
the
often,
process your department
very
has put
often
in place.
witnesses and those who are victims feel that they don't get the hearing.
All right, okay.
So I'm not
You're not minded
I'm not
to.
an automatic fan of a public inquiry. Put it that way. I think Parliament could do much more
All right.
than it does in the past. And this is a territory. This is exactly the sort of thing where parliamentary accountability, starting today,
Yes.
can actually be developed.
You didn't just announce the data breach today, or report it to Parliament, of course, Defence Secretary. You announced the closure of the asylum scheme designed to deal with that data breach, among other things. Now, some of those affected by the breach may only have come to discover that they were affected as a result of what you have said today. Now, many people listening to this, might find the timing of that odd. Why would you be taking away the lifeboat at precisely the moment of maximum danger?
Everybody who had individual applications that was part of that data set was informed before I made the announcement.
Well,
to the
not
House of
necessarily,
Commons.
because by your own admission, your department's own admission, not everybody, because some of the contact details may have changed over time, may have been informed. And of course, as you know, there are family members and other people affected who may not be aware. So that's not completely the case.
And where we've got incomplete information, we have also set up a dedicated website. We've also set up a dedicated information service centre.
But what's the point of that if I just log on to it and I find I was affected, but then the scheme that I might
Because
use
if you
to
want
address that has closed?
Well, because if you want further information...
well, the further information would be the British government doesn't care anymore.
Well, let's
Too
get
late.
Let's get this in perspective. The very large number, the 18,714
Yep.
individual applications that were part of that big data set
Yeah.
that was lost in February 22,
Yeah.
were all applicants to the ARAP scheme.
Yes.
That's the Afghan Relocations and Assistance
Yep,
Policy
we know that.
scheme. It's been
Yep.
in place for more than 4 years.
Yes.
It's something that, in opposition and in government, we really strongly backed, because this was Britain's commitment
Yeah.
to those brave Afghans that worked with or served with our forces during those long 20 years.
And I know all that, Secretary of State. I'm great. I'm just conscious you haven't got much time, so I just want to be absolutely clear. I sat in court, Secretary of State, for 2 years. I was told repeatedly, that if this data set, if the Taliban became aware of this data set, it would represent lethal risk to the people on it and their families, potentially up to 100,000 people. That was the entire basis of the superinjunction. And if the Taliban didn't know about the data set already, they definitely do now, because you announced it in the House of Commons. So why at that precise moment would you take away the scheme designed to help these people? It doesn't make any sense.
Because what I've also done today is to publish an independent report that I commissioned from Paul Rimmer. He's a former senior civil servant. He's the ex-deputy head of Defence Intelligence. And he has given us being you, the media, us in Parliament, me in particular as a cabinet member responsible for this area, an up-to-date, fresh threat and risk assessment, in particular an assessment of the risk of...
So those people are no longer in danger?
Well, if you read, as you will have done, Rimmer's report, he concludes a number of things. 4 years on after the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan, he says there's little evidence of any systematic campaign of retribution.
In which case,
or
what was the
reprisal.
point of the superinjunction? What was the point of it?
I can't account for the last government and Ben Wallace making the decision to apply for an injunction.
Would you have taken out
what
the
I can account
superinjunction?
for and explain is, and say to you this, I totally understand why you've been so frustrated by this injunction. It stops you doing your proper business. But that has been lifted today only because
we now
we now have Rimmer. We have an updated, new assessment of the risk, which the judge today
Yes.
has said is the material evidence that allows him
I
to
understand.
remove his superinjunction. It allows me to change
I
government
understand.
policy.
Would
and
you have
that's what I've
taken out
done.
the superinjunction if you had been Secretary of State back then?
Very, very unlikely. It offends me deeply, the idea that we have a superinjunction in place. I believe really deeply in the role of the Parliament, the job of the parliamentarian, and the accountability of government in our system to Parliament.
So it was a mistake.
When you've had for the last 2 years a secret resettlement route set up by ministers in the previous government, when you've had a big data loss that has not been disclosed, and when you've had a superinjunction, an unprecedented superinjunction in place, which nobody knows, of course, about, you haven't got public knowledge, you haven't got press reporting,
Indeed.
you haven't got parliamentary accountability, all fundamentals of our British way of doing things.
So would you say it was a mistake?
It's absolutely not what I would have done. I've worked hard during this year to get to this position now where we can make a different policy decision. I've closed the scheme, this special secret route of getting people out of Afghanistan. I've applied for the superinjunction, which has been lifted, and I've disclosed for the first time the extent of this data loss, which nobody knew about.
Would you rule out the use of superinjunctions in your department in the future?
Well, you can never say never.
Well, why?
But
You just said you wouldn't have done it and it was a mistake.
I deal as Defence Secretary with a whole range of highly classified information and activities.
What about as a politician who believes in democracy?
For me, it would have to be an extremely high bar.
So do you think...
But to be quite honest, I'm not sure how fruitful it is to be talking about those sort of hypotheticals. I'm telling you how much this has mattered, because I've worked so hard over the last year in order to get this scheme closed, the injunction lifted, people having the proper knowledge of this data loss, and so that the accountability that you want to see, I want to see, that Parliament deserves and the public have a right to know, can start, and it starts today.
Defence Secretary, I'm sure we're all very grateful for your work. But nonetheless, you
don't
will
need to be grateful. That's my job. That's my duty.
But you will understand.
That's why I've done it.
But you will
understand.
understand.
You don't need to patronise me like that.
I don't mean to patronise you. But what I'm saying to you is that you are saying that we shouldn't engage in these hypotheticals. And what I'm saying to you is that this is set by your own admission. It set a precedent. It's something that hadn't happened before. And it is not something that sits well, again by your own admission, in our tradition of parliamentary democracy, where Parliament is sovereign and must be told what is going on in order to scrutinise ministers like yourself. So what I'm asking you very, very clearly is whether you believe that a superinjunction should ever be used again by ministers, and whether you think there is a danger that this has set a precedent that they may be used again in future.
I can tell you how deeply uncomfortable I've been. I can tell you how deeply concerned I've been. I can detail how hard I and colleagues have worked to get to the position where we have got to today. Look, you're asking me to rule out ever circumstances that neither of us can foresee.
But it never happened before.
What I'm saying to you is, it is not an instrument that the British state in our society should reach for. And ministers at that time, in August 2023, in the previous Conservative government, chose an injunction, not accountability. And for nearly 2 years, you have been prevented from reporting on this, the public have been prevented from knowing about this, and Parliament has been prevented from scrutinising this. That situation has changed now. It has only changed because we got to the position where I was able to commission the RIMA report. We've got an updated threat assessment and risk assessment, particularly related to the highly unlikely nature of the fact that RIMA concludes that being on the database is going to increase the risk to anyone in Afghanistan. And we've got to the position the position now where we can take these steps.
Would you call, finally, Secretary of State, would you call what's happened a national scandal?
I would. A national scandal. I would call it shocking. I was shocked when I first found out about it. As I made my statement to the House of Commons, I could tell, and I expected MPs to be shocked in the same way, that they'd seen a government, the last Conservative government, set up a secret relocations route to put in place a superinjunction and to fail to disclose a massive data loss. So I feel this is it is shocking. Look, it's something that I never want to see again in my time in Parliament or in government.
But you can't give us the assurance.
And
you won't.
I've bent every sinew to get to the point with colleagues now in government that as a government we've taken a fresh view of this. We've been able to take fresh policy decisions. We've got it will mean fewer people. It will mean lower cost. It will mean greater transparency because we've changed the policy. We've ended the scheme. We've removed the superinjunction.
You talk about fewer people. Why is it that there was an ethical obligation to these people yesterday and there isn't one today, the day you've closed the scheme? I think that is the thing that Secretary of State, that a lot of people listening to this will just not be able to understand. Why is there a statute of limitations on our ethical obligations to these people?
Two reasons. Because we don't have and have never had an obligation to all Afghans.
No.
We under the previous government and the previous scheme, we had a scheme that was designed based on an assessment of risk, which has now changed 4 years after the fall of the Taliban.
It's about politics, not morality, isn't it, Secretary
No,
of State?
it's not. It's absolutely not. It's
about
based on a fresh assessment of risk, and it's based on a fresh judgment about the proper balance of cost, proportionality of the secret scheme that was in place, which was indefensible, and questions also of being able properly to account to public, to Parliament, and have the public know through the media reporting, and all those factors. So the Rimmer report, that fresh assessment of risk, was a really significant but not the sole element of the decisions that I've taken, supported by the Cabinet, that have meant we've disclosed this big data loss, we've closed this secret scheme, and we've been able to ensure that this superinjunction that you have battled against for nearly 2 years, but properly abided by as well, can be removed, and that we do not have government of this country responsible for a superinjunction in place over something like this.
Secretary of State, we're really grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.